What to do, YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the most recent project by Dr. Dre. Basically, this EP is called Grand Theft Auto 5: The Contract, and it came out in early 2022, which is really in late 2021. This was something that was supposed to be. This was something that was an expansion pack for Grand Theft Auto 5, where you can download that expansion to the game and get some bonus content, like some bonus missions for Grand Theft Auto 5, where you have to help out Dr. Dre in that game and that type of stuff. But in that, Dr. Dre gave the video game 6 exclusive songs, which was comprised into the Contract EP. So basically, there's a lot of hubbub. Dr. Dre did the Super Bowl a couple years ago and that type of stuff. But really, I kind of feel like this is kind of like another reemergence of Dr. Dre in a lot of ways, just because Compton was kind of a kickoff, just kind of the introduction of like the sounds that folks like Kendrick Lamar and to a lesser extent like the game and just folks like Anderson .Paak were kind of introducing like the mid 2010s. Like I feel like Compton was really kind of seemingly flattered by albums by Kendrick Lamar like To Pimp a Butterfly and Good Kid, Mad City, and it kind of showcased the fact that it was Kendrick this time who kind of helped shift like the West Coast sound more so than Dr. Dre like he had done in the 80s and 90s and even 2000s. That was kind of the concept. Now, I back in the day, back in 2015, back in the day, I reviewed Compton and gave it a pretty decent score, but it hasn't really charmed me as much as it did back in 2015. And I think I was kind of seeing it through rose-colored glasses 8 years ago, but I look after the concept now, I kind of realize, I mean, Dr. Dre has kind of really stuck out like a sore. Dr. Dre has really kind of stuck out like a sore thumb in recent times. I feel like kind of similar to Eminem and like just folks like that who kind of have more kind of melded kind of opinions as far as talking about how they fit with these times. Like there's just a lot of shifting of sounds that some of these folks, because they're kind of out of touch and don't drop music as often, I kind of feel like their sweet spot is just kind of more scorned and kind of ruffled to the point where they just don't mesh and meld kind of well with some of these sounds that have been kind of happening. Now, when I think of Migos or Future or NBA Youngboy or DJ Khaled, or like Lil Baby or some of those type folks, Travis Scott, some of those type folks who are here often enough and have dropped like 3 or 4 or 5 albums across the past 7 or 8 years, they kind of connect better with the sound. But Eminem just is not one. I prefer Eminem kind of doing his own sound when he does projects. I don't like him trying to tackle like trap music, 2010s trap music, because it's not really his format. And it's the same thing with Dr. Dre, where there are some, I mean, he doesn't overly kind of do trap. Originally, I thought like a year and a half ago when this project first came out that it was just a bunch of trap tunes, but it isn't. I mean, this album's going to get like a decent score, but it's not like the wholesome victory that I would have expected from it. This is just kind of like pretty much like a shot in the arm and like a re-up with Dr. Dre after not hearing from him since 2015. And that's actually quite some time just looking at Compton, just the lackadaisical and kind of bittersweet kind of reception that project kind of got. But I kind of look after it nowadays, like this album is still, I don't want to say mediocre, but it's not much better than mediocre. And that's just kind of the thing about it. Like me liking, out of 6 songs on this EP, I wound up liking 3 of them, and one of which was not the Eminem song. So it's just kind of the situation where, you would think a classic potent combination like Eminem and Dr. Dre would just knock your socks off automatically, but it's not like it was in 1999 or 2003 or something. That's kind of a problem. But luckily, Dr. Dre doesn't try to keep that trap sound very often. He at least does it. He at least tries to tackle trap on gospel, but it's not like the whole album that kind of does that. There is some kind of bewildered and kind of taken aback, kind of reminiscing type tunes on here, like ETA, which is Estimated Time of Arrival. Didn't really like that one either. And Black Privilege was kind of like a poor soul type song, but there are some good moments on here where I do feel like Dr. Dre, obviously being a veteran by this stage, is just kind of underneath the impression that I was interested to kind of see that some of this type sound, just because there's not an overabundance. Like I do like recent music, but I kind of feel like some of the mentalities kind of are begetting just because of the more health prone and kind of more white knight kind of prone type stuff that's kind of going along in these sorts of times. It just feels like a lot of people feel a lot more obligated to kind of be like on a podium and that type of stuff. And I'm just glad that Dr. Dre didn't really tackle that subject this time. He's not really trying to be a white knight, and he's not really trying to, Dr. Dre is not really trying to be a white knight, and he's not really trying to broadcast and, save the day and that type of stuff as far as that kind of goes. But I do look after it. It's a mildly begetting project. It doesn't hit as heavily as I'd like it to, but I will have to say that I appreciate Dr. Dre's personality just because he basically is the same as he was back in the 80s, just with kind of a more grizzled kind of tone and just kind of more. I mean, he has the lyrics. I mean, I will say that the lyrics on here are pretty good. Who's ever writing for Dr. Dre this time is pretty good with what they've done with him, but I just kind of look after it. I don't know. It's weird for me to say that Dr. Dre, a 6 song project, me not giving that like a 10 out of 10, because you would think that every song would have been flabbergastingly good, but I just can't say that. And this is kind of the concept. I almost blame partially like the styles that were kind of going along. We'll get into these and I'll explain as to why some of these just didn't hit as heavily. But the concept about it is it should be like nothing to be able to have 6 kick-ass songs by Dr. Dre. Just by no means should I be saying that I only like half of a 6 song project. I just think that's kind of awkward and just kind of lackadaisical to say the least. But I just look after it like so. We'll go ahead and talk about the songs I recommend, and then we'll talk about the songs I don't recommend. We'll just split it right down the middle. So basically, I'm gonna give this album. Before I do that, I'm gonna go ahead and score it. Me liking 3 songs out of 6 on here. I'm gonna go ahead and give this. Me liking 3 songs out of 6 on here. I'm gonna give this EP like a 5.5 out of 10. It just gets a little bit better than average because I commend Dr. Dre for having the talent of what he does, but I kind of feel like I am disappointed that this just did not hit heavier than it probably should have. I mean, I would at least say that I should have had like the majority of this project. So it gets a 5.5. It's not. I'm not gonna give it a 5. Just I give him some degree of credit, but I kind of look after it that this didn't quite hit as heavily. But the 3 songs I recommend would be "Diamond Mine" with Nipsey Hussle and Ty Dolla $ign, "Falling Up" with Thurs and Coco Sarai, which is kind of a solo Dr. Dre song, and then "The Scenic Route" with Anderson .Paak and Rick Ross. So those are the 3 ones. So Diamond Mine is a pretty eviscerating kind of tune. I definitely like this one. Nipsey Hussle has a pretty scene-stealing verse on here. It's definitely a pretty excellent one. It's interesting that he did some songs with Dr. Dre because he was kind of like a very heavy mixtape rapper. I've at least listened to the Marathon Continues, but it's been a while since I've checked in with Nipsey. But just to kind of say the fact that he kind of had like a pretty glistening kind of bop on Dr. Dre and Nipsey Hussle had a pretty glistening bop on here. It's just a very in motion kind of tune. It just feels very quick and kind of riveting, but it's just a decent kind of ruminating bop. This is kind of one has a lot more quick pace about it, and I do feel like it's just kind of one. It's not really a club bop, but it just kind of has a little bit more liveliness and busybody type feel towards it. But I do like the beat on here. It's just a very glittery, glistening kind of beat for that sort of concept. It's really kind of sparkling one. If you want a Dr. Dre club song, which is definitely something I did kind of want, I would say "Falling Up" is a good one for that. That's another hit here. This is a very boppish kind of nightclub cut, and it has kind of like an electro kind of feel towards it. It's an easy kind of contemporary dance bop from a veteran. I feel like hearing Dr. Dre on this sort of tune is the sort of stuff that he should have done tons. Like, this is what I think Detox should have been chock full of. This is definitely what Compton should have been chock full of too. I just think these type of tunes is what should have happened. This is an easy kind of highlight for Dr. Dre. Pretty much, in my opinion, top 2 of the best songs on this album. I'd probably say it's either "Diamond Mine" or "Falling Up." They're the top 2 songs on here, but I just feel like both these hit pretty heavily. And, you know, when I think of club songs by Dr. Dre, apart from like "California Love" and maybe "Forgot About Dre" or some of the stuff that he did like 20 years ago or over 20 years ago, this is about as contemporary as Dr. Dre gets. I mean, for the most part, him checking in with us about once every decade or so. This is just kind of something that this doesn't happen oftenly. This doesn't happen oftenly enough. I would have to say it's a pretty highlighted hit, but this is very fleeting. I feel like there should definitely be like another good several types of these songs. It just feels like he didn't do this at all in the 2010s or the 2020s or just stuff like that. So this is kind of the thing. But in the Scenic Route, this is another hit. This is kind of a dreary, kind of suave after hours kind of hit. Just a good unwind and kind of smoke one kind of tune, and it's just very glossy. I feel like this is just a good example of like a glossy kind of track on here. This really feels like something New York oriented. I mean, a lot of this album doesn't necessarily feel West Coast. I feel like a lot of this EP doesn't really feel West Coast as much. It's kind of toned down from the way it was on Compton, but this is just very much like a New York kind of just saxophone-esque, this kind of like after hours, this kind of pink skies, orange skies kind of tune, just for, you know, getting like winding down, getting a hot dog, that type stuff, maybe getting some pasta, just appreciating the sights and just kind of more lackadaisical in its approach. Like, it's interesting just because Dr. Dre has some lackadaisical kind of songs on here. Like, I feel like The Scenic Route and ETA are both like that, but there's in terms of like the Liddy kind of turned up songs, the really only one that hits on here is just Falling Up. I do feel like Diamond Mine is pretty riveting, but that one's just not as much of a club tune. It's just kind of more of an in motion, whether you're cruising around or just kind of walking around, just kind of in motion in a lot of kind of more alert kind of ways, but it is kind of lively. So that's this kind of thing. But so now to talk about the three songs I didn't enjoy, which would be Black Privilege, which is just kind of a bad soul sample. This is kind of one that Rick Ross kind of tries to do, but pulls it off way better. The sample on this song is just not that good, and it just doesn't meet Dr. Dre's standards. It's kind of a poor introspective kind of tune. It's just one that I couldn't connect with quite as much. I really was surprised. I mean, you would think that Dr. Dre could knock out this soulful stuff out of the park just quite easily, but this is just one that I just feel like how many soul songs that you hear on projects, this is not one, you know, with Dr. Dre being like the guy who did the Chronic and that type of stuff, this is not one that makes me want to smoke or just kind of muse or something like that. This really was just not the typical kind of sound that was needed. I definitely feel like I know he has better beats on his hard drive or in his studio somewhere that could have been a better tune for this one. Just did not capture it. Gospel with Eminem has a trap sound. This is the sort of stuff that Jackal Goldkick and I were talking about, just with like a poor rendition of what Dr. Dre and Eminem were trying to do with trap. I really feel like this was trying to be like a demonic beat, but it just came off as more of like a kind of worse version of like a SoundCloud beat. This sounded very crummy, just doesn't suit Dr. Dre. The beat just doesn't excite, and it feels very flat, and it's not riveting. So I just feel like that concept is kind of an awkward topic too. I feel like gospel is just kind of an odd concept as far as that kind of goes, but this is not one. I mean, this is pretty much for a song that has Dr. Dre and Eminem, this is pretty much one of their worst combinations of songs that they've done. This is pretty much one of their worst. I feel like gospel is one of the worst Dr. Dre and Eminem collaborations. I mean, there's plenty. I mean, normally this is like gold. I mean, they've always had the Midas touch with these, but this is one that just really didn't nail it, which is pretty disappointing. But ETA is another one. This and another kind of disappointing combination is just Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, which they've always, I mean, they've been doing this for 30 something years now. So the fact that a Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg song didn't hit is another disappointment. But I look after it, you know, Busta Rhymes and Anderson .Paak are on here too, but I really just did not like the beat on this song at all. It was a reminiscing tune with a very poor instrumental to create those kinds of memories, and it's just kind of a grating kind of beat. It's supposed to, I know this song was trying to kind of wind down and kind of reflect on things and just completely not be a song for getting turned up and getting lively and that type of stuff, but I just kind of look after it just being able to say that it just was a song. You would think that Dr. Dre would be able to have a beat somewhere in his catalog that could make you want to smoke one and just kind of kick back a little bit more. But it was just such a boring and kind of just ingratiating kind of format for doing that sort of thing. It just really didn't encapsulate the way I would have liked it to. So it's just kind of the thing. But yeah, me liking half the project, I'm going to give this EP like a 5.5 out of 10. The social score, I'll go ahead and give the social score like a 6.75 out of 10 because I do feel like there's some Liddy moments on here. I do feel like Diamond Mine is a nice riveting one. It's really kind of like one that's kind of exhilarating. I feel like Falling Up is an excellent club boss, pretty much top two best songs on here. And the Scenic Route's just a very kind of dreary kind of winding down kind of tune that's just very suave and just hotel-like, that just has a lot of sophistication that I like. So it just has some riveting type feels. It's kind of the concept. I would have liked maybe a song or two more, maybe something that could have happened, but I feel like for the most part, like I said, it's just kind of, it's straightforward, but it's just kind of the concept that you just have to take the reality that Dr. Dre just didn't. I mean, it's not to say that this is a horrible project, but it's not like the wholesome kind of victory. And it's just kind of odd saying that. I mean, this is, I know that Dr. Dre has dropped a couple clumsy ones before with like the Dr. Dre Presents the Aftermath, but this kind of concept is just odd. I think that just kind of happens to be the concept about it. It's just really the context of just being able to say that it is good, but it's kind of difficult to get a hold of, and it's not quite as esteemed as what it probably needs to be. I think, you know, it's better than Compton. I will say, I think ultimately it's been a while since I've listened to Compton, but I would say this is decent enough if you absolutely need some more Dr. Dre, but it's just not it. I mean, obviously, if you're still sold on like the Chronic in 2001 and Straight Outta Compton and Niggas for Life and stuff that he did in the 90s and 80s. I mean, this is pretty much not going to alter. It's just basically like a shot in the arm and an update for Dr. Dre. That's all it is. That's what I treat it as, because his old stuff is better. It's not to say that this is horrible and doesn't compare, but it's just not the wholesome victory that's going to get like the reimagining of Dr. Dre being a household name again. It's just kind of, I feel like, this project dried up and he went back. I mean, he still is saying things, but it's not like he's, I mean, it may be because of his money and like his legendary status, but in terms of like the catalog that he's dropped since at least 2003 or maybe 2006, the stuff that he's done since like 2005, 2006 or so, there's just not a ton of projects to really talk about by Dr. Dre that have, like, for folks that are beneath the age of like 35 or 30 or something. It's just not quite as large of a scale to be able to refresh people's memories and say this sort of stuff. But that's what, that's kind of what channels like mine and Jackal Gold Kicks are kind of for, is just to talk about. That's kind of what YouTube channels like mine and Jackal Gold Kicks and folks like that are for, is just being able to say that there are some brilliant kind of moments from previous times as far as that kind of goes. Just looking at like 2001, The Chronic, Friday soundtrack, Straight Outta Compton, Niggas for Life, just the stuff, the DOC album, stuff like that, all the stuff that Dr. Dre produced. I mean, it's just kind of the concept. It's just kind of like I said, it's just like a shot in the arm. You just have to take it. Like I said, it's just like a shot in the arm. I mean, it might be a mild disappointment, but it's just kind of the concept that it's just more just because of Dr. Dre's status and just that it's the heights that he's reached, more so than the fact that, I mean, if he had dropped like 5, 6, 7, 8 bad albums across the past 8, 9, 10 years, it'd be a little bit different to complain, but he just doesn't do stuff that much anymore. So it's kind of, I still am disappointed somewhat, but not to the point where he's just had a horrid catalog and horrid like stuff like that, because he doesn't. That's just kind of the thing. It's just the fact that he doesn't do much anymore. He's kind of not active as much, and he just has kind of lost his sweet spot. But that's just, you take the bad with the good. But that's just kind of the concept. So in terms of the future, like, this is pretty much the most recent Dr. Dre project, and I just would have to say it's decent. And if you can get this on CD, I would definitely recommend it. It's pretty glossy. I definitely like the album cover, or the single cover that Dr. Dre had. It's pretty slick looking, so I just would have to say it's a decent, pretty solid concept. But it's kind of like with Eminem, where it's just kind of strange that they're not quite having the Midas touch like they used to 20 years ago and such. It's kind of an odd thing, but I do like it enough to be able to say that it's kind of worth it. I would just want to get this in CD format, but it's a decent pickup.